Hello students, I am Rajashri ma'am and I am going to explain the story The Silver Lining by Chaman Nahal. Chaman Nahal was born in 1927 and he wrote many novels, reviews, articles and works of criticism. And he was awarded Sahitya Academy also, and this story is taken from the volume of short stories The Weird Dance. So let's start with the story. The silver lining. The silver lining means the ray of hope. When there is sun rays behind the cloud, it looks like a silver lining from behind the cloud. So, which is like ray of hope. So, this story is named as the silver lining, where there is a little girl who was deaf and dumb, and her parents were in utter despair, embarrassment and sorrow. And but afterwards, at the end of the story, they could find that this type of disabled children can also lead a normal life. So that is why this story is a story of hope. It is difficult to assess the range and quality of human emotions. Assess means to evaluate, to measure. It is very difficult to measure the human emotions from the outward appearance. Those with smiling evergreen faces may have warmed like griefs, gnawing at their existence, and a dull, idiotic looking person may be blissfully happy. Those people who look happy from outside may have a deep grief in their mind, which gnaw means biting gradually. They may it may bite them gradually in the deep of their mind, and the dull idiotic looking person may be very happy. Life is a strange humdrum affair where even a few moments of peace snatched should probably be gratefully acknowledged. The so, so life is a strange affair, but people should realize or recognize the moments of peace from out of it. I recently had the very pleasant experience of staying at a guest house in one of the hill resorts. The writer is writing the story in first person, and he went to stay at a place in the hillside, on the hillside, and it was a beautiful place. A friend of mine had earlier warmly recommended the place to me, claiming for it all the facilities which most of these boarding houses advertise but generally lack. A friend had suggested him to go there because the guest house was very good, and whatever advantages they promised to give the boarders would actually give them. It was centrally situated, close to the post office, close to the market, close to the bus stand, was yet isolated and away from the common din. The guest house was, or the boarding house was, in the center of the town, but yet it was away from the chaos of the market and the office and all these things. There were there were pleasant views to be had from there. It had excellent cuisine, and I was well looked after by one of the most charming hostesses one could find anywhere. And he had every convenience there. Good food, cuisine means food, and he could get good food, and he was looked after by a beautiful hostess. I discovered that the place exactly corresponded to the details described, and he found that the place was similar to the description given to him. But it was the hostess, particularly, and her husband and their little daughter who really proved to be the center of attraction to me. But he was not He was not that much eager about the convenience given to him, but he was charmed by the people looked who were the hostess or host and hostess of that house. The lady belonged to the south, though she had married a North Indian. She was rather dark but had a very pleasant face, all smiles and kindness. The husband was a huge swarthy man. Swarthy means dark complexioned with large bony limbs. He was extremely well mannered, and there was not a trace of that untempered roughness which one finds in most men hailing from the north. People usually think that the people of North India are bad tempered and rough, but that person was very much well mannered and had no roughness in him. And they were Bhandaris. Mrs. Bhandari, the landlady, took me in hand the moment I arrived. That means she received him readily when he went there. She looked after my luggage, gave instructions regarding my room, had a cup of delicious coffee produced in no time, and then put me at my ease of by taking. That means they took all the care of him very promptly. He was given a delicious coffee promptly, and the luggage were also taken from him, and I was completely and they had also started talking with him, and I was completely won over by the family. That means I was totally impressed by them, by the family. It appeared that as if I had known them from years. While thus chatting with the two of them, I became aware of the slightly built girl hiding behind the settee. That at that time he found a little girl who was hiding behind the settee. Settee means couch. She must have been about 8 and was sweet and charming like her mother. Her hair was closely cropped with a straight fringe across the forehead in Chinese fashion. She was in jeans and in her half sleeved loose jersey and high boots looked a miniature jungle queen. And he has described the little girl here who looked like a jungle queen. She was behaving a bit too timidly for one and was trying to avoid me. She was looking like a jungle queen, but her behavior was very timid and she was afraid. I couldn't help smiling. I saw that she was staring at me. I said, "What's your name?" and beckoned to her to come to me. And he tried to talk with her and asked her name, but and called her by beckoning. Beckoning means making a gesture of hand. The girl became immediately self conscious, shook her head, and stood where she was. But the girl was very self conscious and she did not come to him. And I called once more, "Hello, come here, dear." She blushed and again shook her head. She blushed. Blushed means became red in shame. And she did replied in negative. Shook her head means said that she would not come. After a second, she ran out. I thought I saw tears in her eyes. I suddenly became aware of an awkward pause in the room, and turning to look at the Bhandaris, I discovered that both of them were frowning, a painful look on their faces. At that time, he became aware that Bhandaris were not that much happy as they were looking before, and they had painful look on their faces. Mr. Bhandari squeezed the arm of his wife and said apologetically, "I am sure, Mr. Dhanda, you see, our daughter cannot hear anything nor speak. That's why she didn't come to you." I gasped, and muttering something about being sorry, I became confused and did not know what more to say, for I was feeling ashamed at my forwardness with a child who was obviously not in a position to respond to my approaches of friendship. And the Mr. Bhandari and Mrs. Bhandari were in pain, and they were apologetically, they said. That means they were sorry to say that their daughter could not hear or speak. And the author is also sorry, was also sorry, because he made too much hurry to get introduced with the daughter. And he also muttered of being sorry. And I vaguely felt I had wronged her and her parents, and he also realized that he had wronged their parents. It did not took me long to see that this was a situation the poor parents had to put up with almost daily, for every day one or two guests left and new ones came along. At that time he could realize that there were so many boarders who would come there, and the parents had to give explanation of such behavior of their girl, and give the explanation of the behavior of their girl, and it was very embarrassing for them. And at the very first meeting, or soon afterwards, they would run into the child, be fascinated by her charm and beauty, and want to talk to her, to pat her, and so on. And every time it would result in the child silently smiling, sighing, and withdrawing, leaving looks of agony on the faces of her parents. And at all the time they had to go through this painful experience again and again, and the child would get also get agonized by these experiences. Often it would lead to lengthy explanations as how the calamity had come about, for many of the inquisitive visitors liked to know if it was from birth or the result of an accident, whether anyone else in the family suffered from a similar disability, and if any treatment was being given. And there were so many boarders who were inquisitive. That means they would want to know more and more about the matter, and they used to ask too many questions about the child, and that would make them more and more embarrassed. The queries were answered by the parents haltingly and with obvious anguish, and they would and every time they would answer them with anguish, that means sadness. What struck me as the worst part of the situation was that the girl would be often gravely looking on, her eyes aghast with horror and self pity, aware that she was the topic of discussion. And the child would know that she was the center of all this disturbing matter. She had no other pastime than to run around the house or play with the servants. She had nothing to do, no pastime. That means means of means of playing or having fun. Uh, and but she had to run around the house. She did not go to school, as there was none there to cater for her needs, and it was a small town. There was no such school for her where the deaf and dumb would be trained. They had tried to teach her at home, but without success. She could only hear faintly, without feeling much, when one shouted close to her ears, and she could speak nothing except utter animal like cries of happiness and sorrow, or say crudely such words as mama or uncle. They had tried to teach her at home, but it was of no use. She could only say only some words. All her other communications were confined to gestures with her hands, which brought a fleeting sensation of torture to her whole being when one failed to follow what she was saying. She would try to communicate with the gestures of her hands. But when somebody could not understand what she wanted to say, it would be more torturous for her, more painful for her. To save the child from such repeated humiliation, one day suggested something to the Bhandaris, which the parents, after trepidation, agreed to try. And the author suggested some way out of this problem to Bhandaris, but they were not ready at first, because they had a feeling of fear uh, or anxiety. Trepidation means the feeling of anger or feeling of anxiety or fear. Agree, but because we decided to have, the author suggested that we decided to have bits of paper typed and to hand one over one of these sheets, duly sealed in a cover, to every new visitor as soon as he entered the guest house. The author suggested to hand over a sheet where the situation would be written, and which would be given to every boarder of the guest house. The text of the sheet ran, "Our daughter is deaf and dumb. You may hurt her by trying to be friendly too soon. As she can neither understand nor reply to your kind words, you are requested to please give her time to approach you and make your acquaintance. Thank you." This was the message he suggested to give everyone. A line to the effect that they might be spared questions about her was removed by Mrs. Bhandari on the plea that it would not be compatible with the spirit of hospitality. The one line was erased from that sheet, because they thought that it would be rude to give such instructions to the visitors, and it would not be compatible to their hospitality. They were so hospitable to all the people, and which would may look rude to them. As it was, she felt the note was not a very kind one to be given to people who were going to make her guest house their temporary home. But she gave consent to save the girl. Untold misery and helplessness she experienced every time a stranger approached her. But she thought that the note was very useful to them, because it would remove many embarrassing situations every time boarder would come there or visitor would come there. The ruse worked well, even beyond our expectation. Ruse means the trick. The trick worked well, which they did not hope. So much they did not hope. Though a few sympathetic questions were still put to the parents, the poor child was spared. The child would not get annoyed by the people after. Later, the girl herself slowly became intimate with many of the guests. The Bhandaris felt relieved and thought that at least one of their problems was temporarily solved, and they had relief from the misery temporarily at least, and they sighed the breath of relief after that. So this is the first part of the explanation, students, and you please wait for the second part of the story, because the story is long and I am explaining it very elaborately, so it will take some time. So please wait for the second part of the video. Thank you.